Yeah.
We're on.
Who has their Wi-Fi on to download the material?
Yeah, very nice to meet you.
We good? All right, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to the session on public trust and confidence, one of our core curricula. I'm Kathy Griffin. I'm on the board for NACM, and I'm currently the chair of the core committee, which falls underneath the education committee. If you're interested in learning anything about that committee, we have a committee meeting tomorrow from 11:30 to 12:30. The core is in charge of keeping the curricula fresh and relevant. So we have subcommittees that rotate and review. So if there's a certain curricula you're interested in, just shoot me an email at kathy@nacmnet.org. Our presenter today is Kevin Bowling, who's also from Michigan, like myself. Kevin is a seasoned presenter. That's the term we came up to yesterday in the other core session. We have seasoned presenters. Kevin is the trial court administrator in Michigan at Ottawa County. He has had several roles over the years. You can see his bio in the app. I don't want to waste the time reading that. One of the, it'll take too long. One of his past roles was also our regional administrator for our state court office, and that's actually how I first met Kevin, was when he used to come to our court as a regional administrator for our AOC. So he's had numerous roles. He's presented, he's taught judges in other countries, but it's a very extensive bio. Also through the app is the PowerPoint for the presentation, and you can also download the curricula at NACM Core. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. And this is a recorded and live streamed session. So if you have a question, if you'll just wait a minute for us to run around with the mic, because we do want to get it on the recording. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all of you and to the folks that are on our live stream. Just in case I have any folks from my own court, I'll wave to them now, and then I'll behave for the rest of the time here. As you can know from looking at the whole conference schedule, that we're focusing all week on public trust and confidence in the courts. Part of what the conference planners wanted to do with this session is to look specifically at the NACM core competency about public trust and confidence. So that's how Kathy and Callie hooked me into doing this, because a few years ago when we started working on redeveloping the entire core, eventually somebody had to sit down and write the different pieces. So I got hooked for this particular competency, wrote the initial piece, and then lots of other folks got involved with the editing and those tasks that go along with trying to get the entire competency and the curriculum and everything that goes along with it out so you have it available to you. One of our goals, and Kathy may talk about this at the committee meeting on Wednesday, is to get to the point where all of you, as court professionals in your own jurisdictions, can go to the core website, look at these resources, and grab them for yourselves and take them back to your own court and teach there. Share it with your staff. So hopefully we'll get to do that as we go along. Because they asked me to do this in 2 sections, this first hour, I've got it broken down as a part 1, where if you look at the public trust and competency, competency, hard to say fast, there are 7 different distinct sections that are built into the competency. So in part 1, we're going to look at the overview, the historical perspective, the impact of effective court process, and then the emergence and impact of procedural fairness. The procedural fairness piece might take a little bit longer and may overlap, so I encourage folks to come back to the second hour. We'll finish up procedural fairness, and then look at a systemic court management approach and a jurisdictional assessment and a commitment to excellence. So those are the distinct areas that we're going to cover in these 2 hours. So, but if you decide you're going somewhere else in the second hour, God bless you. I won't hold it against you. Hopefully we'll have a good turnout. But it's always difficult to do these sessions after lunch and to keep you all awake. So right now, unlike most of the presenters that you have, I'm going to ask you all to take out your phones. Please, take out your phones. We're going to do a couple of exercises here. We're going to use something, open up your browser and just type in kahoot.it. That's all you need to do. And I'm going to get something ready for you that will hopefully be fun for everyone. Does everyone have that? Can you find that app? It's right up here now. So here's your game pin at the top, 814538, and then it's going to ask you to put a nickname in. Have to keep it clean, otherwise they won't let you play. But we'll start seeing names show up here. And folks that are on the live stream can do this as well because it's web enabled and you can do it from anywhere. So we'll give you we got 18 players so far. Are we going to have a few more? Let's see how we do. It'll give me a few seconds. All right. If everyone has clicked in, and we're going to use this again, so you want to keep your app handy as you're going along, and we'll go ahead and start. So there are 2 questions. We'll do them one at a time, and then we'll get some results. So the first question is, has public trust and confidence in the courts ever been an issue in your jurisdiction? There are 4 options. You just need to choose one and click on it. So the first option is, no, we do everything perfectly. Or, absolutely, we're always looking for ways to improve. The blue is not sure our judges handle. Oh, you guys clicked in fast, you got it. So it looks like, absolutely, we're always looking for ways to improve is what most of you thought was the best response. We've got a few where the judges handle community outreach, and I thought I'd catch somebody who'd say, what the hell is public trust and confidence? So we got at least 3 of you. I don't know if you're in this room or if you're on the live stream, but that's what we're going to spend the next hour looking at. So thank you for going along with me on that, and I'm going to see if I can get back to where we started. All right. So for the 3 that wondered what is public trust and confidence, we see this as being integral to the credibility of the judicial system. And I apologize for those of you that are on the ends. If it's easier to see the screen, if you slide in a minute, feel free. Otherwise, where you are is good too. But we're ultimately getting to the point where we want to create a different kind of organizational culture. If you were here for the plenary session yesterday, that's part of what the speaker was talking about, looking at what kind of culture, what kind of integrity, transparency, and accountability do we have in our courthouses and in our programs. That's why when the core was developed, it was developed in stages beginning with principles that included public trust and confidence. But when we looked at this, we went back to literally decades ago where public trust and confidence was first debated in court circles in the United States. And there was a lot of conversation about who's the public. And there were 5 different constituencies that were identified at that time: the general public, individuals, organizations, or groups expressing opinions about the courts. We have people who appear before the courts. We have judicial officers and court employees. We have legislative bodies. But it's important for all of us to know, if we're talking about public trust and confidence, who's the public? And you may have others that you would add to this list as well. When we look at trust, we heard this definition come up yesterday in the plenary as well, but reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety of a person or thing. So it's a relational idea where we try to build those trusting relationships. And the confidence, belief in the powers, trustworthiness, or reliability. So when we're measuring this and trying to ask people what they think about the courts, do they think we're trustworthy? Do they think we're reliable in terms of getting their work done, their legal business that they're coming to us to take care of? So those are an important thing. Most of you, I think, probably understand how the core is structured. But if you're not familiar with it, we have these 3 different modules: principle, practice, and vision. So in the principle, we have 2 competencies that are included there. It starts with public trust and confidence in the courts and the purposes and responsibility of the court. So unlike some of the other competencies, if you look at all 13 of them, nobody in NACM or anywhere else is saying that all of us as court administrators have to have ultimate competency in every single area. All right? We might have different jobs, we might have different responsibilities, but what we are saying in the principle section is that if you work in the courts, you need to know what the purposes and responsibilities of the courts are. That's something that should be a fundamental piece for everyone. And the same thing with public trust and confidence. So we know who we're serving, why we're serving them, and what kind of culture do we want in our individual courts to make sure that we're doing the best we can for the folks that are coming in with their legal disputes. So that's a little bit about the structure. In this case, I wanted to point out a couple of things with these first 2 with the principal module, and that is that even though there might have been 1 or 2 people that were sitting down and writing these original pieces, the process that we went through involved a national vetting process. Some of you sitting in this room were involved in that, so you can't feel like you have a pride of authorship in any of this. Once you write it, somebody else is going to rip it apart. So, but we wanted to get the ideas out. We wanted to get them laid down. Jude Del Prior, who's also a past president of NACM, wrote the purposes and responsibilities. And then I worked on public trust and confidence. We put that together and then turned it over. We had consultants working with us. We had the NACM board work on these things. We had a number of folks from trial courts across the country look at them and try to vet them and update them. And part of what Kathy's committee is going through now is even a couple of years later, things keep happening. The field keeps developing. So NACM's commitment to the core is to try to make sure that we keep it vibrant and that we keep it moving forward. When we look specifically at the public trust and confidence piece of the core, one of the things that we relied on was going back and looking at a variety of surveys that have been done across the country over several decades. Were any of you in Jesse Rutledge's session yesterday afternoon where he talked about a few of you were, I'm seeing a few hands. So the National Center for State Courts has been involved in this analysis of the National Survey of Registered Voters. So every year for the last several years, they've done a scientific poll of registered voters across the United States to try to get an idea of what they think about the courts. Now before that, before the National Center took that on, there were other private groups, private researchers. The Hearst Corporation is one in particular that did a couple of them, and they did them about 10 years apart from each other. But there's a lot of historical data out there that is included in the State of the State Courts retrospective that you'll be able to find online on your conference app. But in essence, part of what we learned from this process is that courts continue to remain the most trusted branch of government. So that's something that has been beneficial for all of us. There's confidence in the fairness of our proceedings, but sometimes there's doubts about how people are doing their jobs and how well we're serving people. There's a growing demand for online services as we have more digital natives come in to the court system, either as employees or as court users. There's an expectation that I want to do my work online. Why can't you make it available for me? Why do I have to take time off work? Why do I have to pay for parking? Why do I have to pay for childcare? I can't arrange all of that stuff. Make it convenient for me, not for you. So that's a demand that we have to look at. And there's this constant worry that has come up. It's not a new issue, but it's been there for several decades, that sometimes politics undermine the impartiality of the court system. So these are things that as court managers, as court professionals, we at least need to be aware of. And that's part of what the competencies do when you look at any one of them. It's to bring certain things into our awareness and make us better as court managers. So a question that I always get hit with, even in my own court when I raise some of these issues, is why should I care about this? What difference does it make? Don't you know that I've got a desk piled full of work? I've got other things to do. Why are you bothering me with things like competencies or public trust and confidence in the courts? You know, that's something for somebody else to worry about. Just let me do my work and leave me alone. The opposite side of that is to look at, you know, the fact that what we do matters. And that's why we should be concerned about how the public views what we do. We all, in different ways, have a direct impact on our local communities. We deal with the quality of life there. We help resolving conflict. That's what courts are largely about. We help with public safety issues. We may be working in collections of one sort or another where we're actually helping out crime victims by collecting restitution. We're dealing with children's issues all of the time. You know, in a lot of our probate courts or similar jurisdictions, we might be dealing with vulnerable populations, folks that are mentally ill, folks that need guardians or conservators, whatever that might be. So I guess my suggestion to all of you is that this is why it's important to us. And I'm guessing that many of you believe the same thing because you already voted with your feet and you came into this session. And at least there haven't been too many that have walked out yet. But if you need to, no problem. So that's why I think we ought to care about this. I think it's an important issue for all of us in the courts. It's not just window dressing. It's not just one of those pithy things that, you know, come easily off our tongues that we should be interested about public trust and confidence in the courts. It really is an issue that's just as important in my mind as good case flow management or training for our staff or any number of things that we do on a day-to-day basis. As we move into the second section of the core competency in self, it looks into the rearview mirror. We try to get to some historical perspectives about where did all of this come from? You know, is this just a new thing that started? Or as was suggested in Jesse's retrospective on the state of the state courts, that, you know, there have been surveys done for the last few decades. This is a lot older than any of us. We go back, many of you are, I'm sure, are fond readers of the Federalist Papers. But we know even back with you know, Alexander Hamilton's fame, we have a lot of things that tell us about the importance in our history as a court. But it goes back farther than that. So how far back does it go when we talk about public trust and confidence? I know there are some ICM fellows in here who stayed up late at night studying all of this stuff. So we go back to 1215, the Magna Carta. And I have a prize some nice chocolate for after lunch for anyone who can tell me what the real name of the Magna Carta is. Anybody want to take a wild guess? No one's going to take that challenge, huh? I guess I get the chocolate. It was the Magna Carta Libertatum, and it's Latin for the Great Charter of. I missed it too. The Great Charter of Liberties. So the idea behind this, that was back when the barons almost got into a war at Runnymede. They were having trouble with King John. They spent time trying to negotiate what their rights would be. And it included issues around public trust and confidence. It also included things like jury trials. That's where that whole concept started. Looked a little different back then. But then we bring it over to our country. We start seeing Federalist Papers being written, including information about public trust and confidence in the courts. A quote that often comes out of Federalist 17 is that the ordinary administration of criminal and civil justice contributes more than any other circumstance to impressing on the minds of the people affection, esteem, and reverence toward the government. So, show of hands, how many have felt like your court users have come in and dealt with you recently with affection, esteem, and reverence? Does that sound like a common occurrence? And yet that's something that we should strive for when we can. Obviously, we've got our underpinnings in our own Constitution, and that's included in the public trust and competency as well. So keep in mind, we're doing this for an hour right now, looking at some of the beginnings, and then there's a part 2. But this course was developed for a 15-hour session. So I'm cutting a lot of things off. And I should have pointed out earlier, many of the sidebars that are included in the slides are there to point out some of the learning objectives that are embedded in the core competencies. Every single one of the competencies have some very specific learning objectives. What should you be able to do or know or demonstrate after you have completed a course? So those are what some of those sidebars are about, if you're wondering and you're looking at the slides later. A couple of other things about the historical basis as we go through and think about public trust and confidence in the courts is going back to 1906 with Roscoe Pound, where some of you may remember that he was a dean of the Harvard Law School. He made this earth-shattering speech to American Bar Association conference and basically ripped the court system pretty well. And the same themes that came out in that talk showed up in a lot of other surveys that were done on trust and confidence in the courts, but basically saying we're too confusing, we take too long, we cost too much, we're not particularly user-friendly. And that's a part of what Pound was talking about. Fast forward several decades, and we finally got to the point where we started talking about performance measures, time standards, and a variety of things to try to get at those issues to see how do we do better as a court system. And if we do better, then we're going to increase that level of public trust and confidence. And I put some other background information in the competency materials themselves if you want to look at them. One example was a paper that was written by David Rotman, who is a researcher with the National Center for State Courts, and he did some work specifically on what does the public's experience with the courts do to their level of public trust and confidence. So it's interesting information. All of this is just part of the historical piece that we look at. But we have to understand that, I think somebody mentioned recently in one of the other presentations that I was in, that courts often think about things looking in the rearview mirror. We're steeped in precedent. Our judges work that way, where they're looking at what decisions have been made in the past to inform the future. And oftentimes in our role as court managers, we're doing the same thing. We have to take a look back and see, how did things unfold? Why did they go a certain way? And what can we do moving forward that'll be better? So these trial court performance standards was one example of this. I included a link to them if you aren't familiar with them. They've been around for a number of years, and they've been taught in a lot of court management courses over the years. But there are these 5 primary standards looking at several of the things that are being talked about during the conference this year. So we have access and justice, timeliness issues, equality and fairness, independence and accountability. But the 5th standard specifically looked at public trust and confidence in the courts. And what does that actually mean? There were a couple of things I wanted to mention specifically about that, if I can find my way there. So within that standard 5, the first standard, if you've never heard these before, is accessibility under public trust and confidence. And the standard says that the public perceives the trial court and the justice it delivers is accessible. So show of hands, how many of your courts are accessible? You all? Good. That's a good show. The second one, standard 5.2, is expeditious, fair, and reliable court functions. That the public has trust and confidence that the basic trial court functions are conducted expeditiously and fairly, and that court decisions have integrity. How many of you would say you'd get a high score on that in your court? Okay, a few less hands up. In the third area, with judicial independence and accountability, the public perceives the trial court as independent, not unduly influenced by other components of government, and that we are accountable. How are we doing on that one? Okay, so if we were, if every single hand shot up and we were all 100% on all of those standards, I would say, session over, let's go to the pool. But not, now Suzanne wants to put her hand up. So, it's just one of those things that even if we've done this for a long time, Kathy had said that I was seasoned. That means I've been hanging around courts a long time. But even after 40 years in the courts, I still see these things as things that we can strive for. We can do better. And hopefully you'll pick up some of that as we go along. When we move into the third section, this drills down a little bit deeper, where we think about issues that we're all working with on a day-to-day basis, and it's the actual court process. We may not think about it, every day in these terms, but what we do day in and day out, what our staff does, how we handle somebody at the front counter, how we handle warrant entry and recalls, how we handle a probationer, how we handle a delinquent youth that comes into the court and needs some help, how we handle mental health services through the courts. Any kind of court process has a direct impact on the people that are coming in. Through those relationships, we're helping people form their impressions about us and what we do and how well we do it. So if we're looking at case filing, do we make it easy for people or do we make it difficult for people? That's, I think, a question that we have to keep asking ourselves. And in our situation, I'm one of the fortunate ones in Michigan where I've got a county clerk register who is elected to, and part of his constitutional role is to handle the records for the court. But we have to work together on a very close basis to make sure that we're making the courts accessible, that we're doing it in a responsible, timely manner. Case processing comes into that. The timeliness comes into it. One of the things that when I was thinking about this whole session and looking at developing some of the public trust and confidence competency originally is that we've got a lot of variation in courts. So these are some questions I want you folks to help me out and answer. If we're looking at processes in the court, I'm curious in your situations, how do these different areas affect public trust and confidence? So we've got case initiation, fees or costs, the discovery process, the hearing or trial process, enforcement of court orders. What does that do? Somebody help me out here. How does that impact, or how do you think that impacts how the public feels about your court operation? Yes, please. And I think I need to give you a microphone. Oh, you got me? It's for our live streaming folks, so they can hear you as well.
Well, discovery and motions are not in plain language, so for anybody who is pro se, or even somebody who has an attorney that wants to be pretty involved in their case, it's really confusing. They don't understand why things happen the way they do, why things have to be turned over, why things can't be turned over, why after a certain point it doesn't matter anymore and you can't get it, or why private stuff has to be handed over to the other side.
Sure.
So that can make them feel like it's not fair.
I think that's a great example. So with all of these smart people in the room, what's one thing that we could do that would improve that situation?
Plain language.
Plain language. Okay. What else could we do? It really is that spot after lunch, isn't it? Where everyone's lolling off. How about some of the other areas? What about fees and costs? Does that have any impact on public trust and confidence? Yeah, okay. Dave?
As you know, I come from a limited jurisdiction court. We handle a lot of traffic, and one of the things that you constantly hear is, oh, the courts, the cost of traffic tickets. The court's just keeping the money. In our state, anyway, the court doesn't keep any of that money, and a lot of the money that comes out of a traffic ticket is imposed at the state level, and the money's going elsewhere, so that even the local funding units are only getting a small piece of that pie. People don't understand. A, the court's not keeping any of the money, and B, even locally, they have little control because much of it is statutorily mandated in terms of where that money's going and what that money's for.
Okay, so just following up on that, and then I'm going to go to the back here. What can we do about that? Is there, it's public education.
To the extent, like for example, in our community, for me as a court manager, a big part of that is making sure at least at a minimum, my funding unit people understand this concept. So when I go before them, I've taken the opportunity to explain what is a traffic ticket, how does it break down, what's coming to you, what makes up the rest, and who's in control of that.
All right.
They need to know that so that they have an idea about what's really happening in the court in terms of fees and costs and what they're funding and how that relationship works.
So, and that's going to be true in many of these things. It's a basic educational opportunity where we can help others understand what we do, why we do it, and what the consequences are.
Most people don't. Very few people do. I mean, even people who, if I polled court clerks in various courts, many of them don't even understand those types of issues. They might understand the tasks of their jobs, but as you and I have talked about many times in the past, we do a really bad job. We do a great job of teaching people the tasks that they're responsible, but not for the overall overview of what we do and what our responsibilities are.
So if you want to make that point in a humorous way sometime, something I tried a few years ago, and I actually have it on videotape so I can prove it, but we took a guy and put a sandwich board on him. If you're not familiar with a sandwich board, it's just something you wear and there's a message on the front, message on the back, and had him walking up and down the streets in one of our cities in our county, and it said, "Tell us everything you know about the courts and I'll give you $1." And we gave him a handful of $1 bills, and he just started wandering up and down the street. And there was another guy following him with a video camera. And people came up and said, basketball courts, squash courts, tennis courts. They had all kinds of answers for courts. But when it came down to it, the one person that we got on tape that knew everything about the courts was a convicted felon who recently got out of prison. That was it. But if you ever want to see the tape, I'll share it with you. Please.
Sure. One thing in our state, costs and fees, all of them are called court costs. So every time someone comes to the court to pay a ticket, and they have a $50 fine and a $210 or whatever it might be.
Sure.
It varies. Court costs, they're saying, but I'm not even coming to court, I'm not even, not. So the first thing we need to do, I think, is get better, and Dave was just saying that, you gotta get better at telling people what it's really for. And let them know that all of these different things are getting paid for with these fees, not, the courts are just not keeping the money.
Absolutely. Great suggestion. Anybody have any other thoughts? Justin.
I think on the case initiation side,
Here's a-
as I'm clerk to the court, case initiation is critical for us because that's the gateway. And a lot of times, someone's first interaction or first observance of what the court does.
Mhm.
And the public does not know the difference between, my staff and the court staff, whether I'm a part of the court entirely or not, or a separate office. And so I think we have to be critically aware of that on the case initiation side to provide the best customer service that we can. We recognize people coming in, have all these issues, and are not there in the greatest of circumstances.
Right.
So everything we do is trying to reinforce the customer service end of trying to make that person feel better when they walk away.
Mhm.
And that's difficult sometimes.
Good point. So part of what the public trust and confidence competency does, if you were to use the curriculum in your own courts and use it for training staff, it gives you some good ideas or direction potentially about what kinds of things you can highlight for staff, how we can help develop a court culture that is going to focus, as Justin was just saying, about how do we make those relationships better for people that are coming into the courts? How do we make sure that we communicate effectively what they need to know as they're working their way through? So there are a lot of different things that could potentially impact. These were just a few examples. There's more in the curriculum if you wanted to take a deeper dive. I'd mentioned the time standards. Something that we don't always, I guess, keep in mind is that this is an issue that has been growing for a number of years. How many of you have time standards that you religiously follow in your courts? Many of you do. Okay. So if you're not aware of that background or the history, it was actually the American Bar Association that started this many, many years ago, back in 1968, and they went through several iterations of time standards for courts. Now, a lot of those time standards, when you look at the early versions, were really lawyer-specific. They were lawyer-centric, and they left the control of a lot of case management in the hands of the lawyers. So I know that when I went through law school, I learned that it was my case. Well, I had to be re-educated, probably at a NACM conference somewhere along the line, that's my case until I come to your court and I file it. And all of a sudden, you're telling me it's not my case now, it's the court's case. And the court's going to take responsibility for following that through, following time guidelines and reminding me what I need to do as an attorney or as a self-represented litigant. So we see a lot of variations. COSCA, the Conference of State Court Administrators, got involved early in 1983 and actually published a set of time standards at that point. And then eventually, because there were all of these different standards that are out there and a lot of states were doing different things, we had several organizations that came together in 2011. We've got the Conference of Chief Justices, we've got the Conference of State Court Administrators, the ABA, NACM was involved in it, and they're actually model time standards. And if any of you have never seen them or are just curious about them, and maybe you get one of the next Kahoot questions right, I've actually got a set of the model time standards that you can take away if you don't want chocolate. So we'll see how we go with that. So let's go back to your browser again. If you can put in Kahoot it, and I'm going to try to switch over one more time, and we'll have some other questions for you. And I need to go to our next game. No, I need to, that one we did. I'm gonna, sorry about that. That was one that we worked on. I've got to get back to, let's see. Sorry about this. It's one of the first times I'm trying to look for my other questions that are already built in here somewhere, but they disappeared on me. That's what let's see if that's where. Might help if I could read it all too. Let's go to the next one and see what, all right, no, I need to end this game because we want to start a new game, and it's number 2. So here we go for number 2, and we're going to play it, and your number should come up where you can enter. It should be loading now, and we'll see how. So there's your number, if you can put that in. Some of you are coming. When we got a few players in there, we'll start it. Oh, I like it. We got somebody named Justice for All. Okay, it looks like we've got 33 players. We have more adding. 36. All right, let's go ahead and start with our, we're up to 37. We got 2 questions here for you. First one, does a NACM conference in Las Vegas impact public trust and confidence in the courts? And you've got some options here. Yes, because it seems like a gambling junket supported by taxpayers. Or no, because NACM provides outstanding education. Or maybe optics are not the best, but the taxpayers don't care. Or how about no clue? What do we have? All right. So we have more folks that are thinking that because we have good educational programs, it's not going to seem so bad. We've got a few that are worried about the gambling junket, and a couple that are clueless. So let's try the next question. Oh, we have a scoreboard too. Dana's on top. So maybe you'll get the guidelines. So the next question is, what will improve public trust and confidence in the courts? Will it be free parking, or better communication about the rule of law, or a Starbucks franchise in every courthouse? How about faster elevators? Okay, so you just highlighted for me in a different way what we were just talking about, the fact that a lot of these are communication issues that we have to deal with. And we're interested in trying to make sure that we have, a lot of people that are willing to go out from the court, whether it's the judges, whether it's us as court managers, whether it's folks on our staff, but that can find creative ways to communicate with the public and figure out what's our message, what's the important essence of what we do day in and day out that we need to share with folks and make sure that they understand why what we do is important. How does it affect our communities? And then perhaps, somebody told me once that, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we ought to use them in proportion to each other. Maybe part of it is just going out and listening a little bit more and seeing what folks in our community can tell us. And I realize that sometimes it's hard to think about doing those things when we're focused on trying to process the cases that are coming in the front door, or dealing with the judge that just had an equipment malfunction in the courtroom and is, in orbit and wanting you to fix it and drop what you're doing and fix it now. We all have those situations that come up, but we need to think about ways that we can improve public trust and confidence in the courts when we can. So I'm always interested, and I'd be especially interested if any of you would be willing to share a little bit about what you do in your courts currently to improve public trust and confidence in the courts. Is there anybody that is willing to share an idea of what you do now? Please.
I actually work for the state.
Okay, a microphone's coming your way. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Mike. I work for the state in Georgia, and one of the things that we just approved in the Judicial Council was an interesting thing called a counter card that the law librarian had devised when she brought in a bunch of stakeholders like the local bar association,
Sure.
judges, and created a thing that they could use to give to pro se litigants or self-represented litigants to help them with the process of filing and answering a lot of questions and explaining some of the things of why they couldn't possibly answer specific questions. And it was really well done, and now it's being distributed as an example to all the courts in the state.
Well, maybe you'd be willing to share it with NACM, and we can even spread it farther. Yeah, because one of the things that I did when I was working on this competency originally was to go around and go to a lot of NACM friends and say, what are you doing and what can you share? So there are links and there are activities and things that built into the competency, and maybe that's something that we could add as a specific example. So that'd be a great idea. Yes, please.
I'm from Jamaica, and we've had Public Education Day, in which we have all our stakeholders, probation officers, police, lawyers, doctors, legal aid, about 25 booths set up, and we have persons come in and they get as much information as they need with regards to court processes or whatever legal problems.
Nice. That sounds like a great idea. Just out of curiosity, do you do that frequently? Is it?
Well, the Chief Justice, we have a relatively new Chief Justice, and what he has been doing is going around to the various parishes. We have 14 parishes.
Mm-hmm.
So each parish has been having so far, one parish per month. And I don't know how much that will continue, but at least we give out brochures, pamphlets, and all of that, and persons can come in to, at least they know where to get the information. So it has
Very
assisted
good.
a lot.
So what this says to me, and part of what I did in terms of digging into examples from other jurisdictions in putting the competency together, is that none of us should feel like we have to invent the wheel here. There are a lot of good examples. These were 2 great examples just to begin with here. But if we don't have any kind of programs that currently exist in our courts, and we wanted to start somewhere, I think we can find some examples either in NACM materials or just by reaching out to colleagues that you might meet while you're here at the conference, and find out what folks are doing in other jurisdictions. You know, not everything has to be expensive. There are a lot of things that can be done even if we don't have a large budget for any kind of public outreach. But even starting small and beginning to build that culture of public education about who we are and what we do can be very, very important. So I encourage you to do that, and even tonight at the social gathering might be a great opportunity to compare some ideas as we go along. So the fourth section that is going to take us through the end of this first hour, and then we'll get into the last three sections in the next hour, is this idea of procedural fairness, how it has emerged in the last several years, and how it's been developed and used in a number of jurisdictions around the country. You know, you can see from the learning objective on the side in this particular area where they're looking at ascertaining the level of public misperception about the courts. And there's some materials that I have included, including a number of video clips in the curriculum itself. One of them is an example from Washington State, where the Supreme Court did a public education video that explains a lot of the problems that people have raised about the courts, and then provided clear, understandable responses to them just in a nice short 8 or 9 minute video clip. So that's something that we can look at. The unfortunate flip side to that coin is that there are also a lot of videos available on YouTube if you're interested in looking at them. I included some of them in the curriculum, but they are embarrassing, frankly. They are shots of horrible things that have gone on in courtrooms around the country and have been captured on video one way or another. So, having an understanding of how we're perceived and also what's out on social media and YouTube is important. So this was just one short, very short example that I have, and let's see if it will play for me.
We end today with a question. Where does the Wisconsin Supreme Court go from here? Last week, a special prosecutor decided not to file charges in connection with an altercation between Justices David Prosser and Ann Walsh Bradley. Bradley claimed that Prosser put her in a chokehold. Prosser said Bradley came at him, and he put his hands up simply to block her. What's telling about this case is that 6 justices in the same room came to completely different conclusions about what they saw. But even more telling was the response to the decision. Prosser blasted Bradley for sensationalizing the incident and called her claims scurrilous. Bradley said the case is and remains an issue of workplace security. For the public, not exactly the kind of words that inspire confidence in a deeply divided and troubled court. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Mike Goucher, and I'll see you again next week on Upfront.
So that's just one example. And my apologies to anybody from Wisconsin, but if you're here and you're from Wisconsin, don't feel alone. You are from Wisconsin. We got a couple. Thank you for sharing. If you have any thought, I'd be interested. But there are all kinds of examples. I'm from Michigan. A few years ago, there was battles going on our Supreme Court, even came down to a food fight that was reported among the justices in a conference room at one point. So, there's all kinds of strange things that happen, but it has a direct impact on the public trust and confidence in the courts. That's my point here. Not to pick on any one state, we can all find something that's going on. But if you look at the research and the writings that have been done on this concept of procedural fairness in the courts, it's not rocket science in my mind. It's pretty straightforward, where there are 4 different basic expectations that people have when they come into the courts. Voice is the first one. They want to be able to tell their story. So do we allow them to do that? Or do we say, oh, nope, can't listen to you today. We don't have enough time on the docket. You got 30 seconds to make your argument and we're done. Do people feel like they have a voice? Neutrality is an issue, that they want to have legal principles applied consistently. Are we neutral? Are we that impartial, unbiased, transparent decision makers when people are bringing their disputes to us and need assistance with them? Respectful treatment, many of us probably think that should just be common sense. But how many of us in our time in the courts have seen somebody on our staff or a judge treat somebody disrespectfully? I know I have, and it hasn't been just once. So what are we doing to improve the culture in our courts to make sure that respectful treatment is high on the priority list? Some folks have customer service programs. Some courts do specialized onboarding training for new employees as they're coming in. There are a lot of ways to do it, but we have to think about that respectful treatment and raise the level of importance in all of our jurisdictions. And trustworthy authorities. I always like this one because when you read the materials, it talks about benevolent authorities. But knowing that they're caring, sincerely trying to help people out, it gets back again to what our keynote speaker talked about yesterday with those trust chips. Are people trusting us? Do they know that we have their best interests at heart? Are we going to take care of the issues that they're bringing to us and entrusting in us to get to the right decision? There's another item that I wanted to mention, and I'm just going to let you know, I'll leave it up here if you're interested in it, but on this issue of procedural fairness, the Conference of Chief Justices and COSCA, the Conference of State Court Administrators, actually developed a resolution, Resolution 12, and you've got the link in the materials, but I brought copies if anyone's interested, and I'll just leave those up here. But they talk specifically in that resolution about the importance of procedural fairness in the courts. And it's something, again, that we should all be mindful of and look at as we move forward. So when I think about the legacy that we have in the court system, that I have, that each one of you has, that our individual organizations have, I keep going back in my mind to the person that started the National Center for State Courts, was the first president of the National Center for State Courts, Ed McConnell. But at one point he said, courts exist to serve the public, not to serve the judges, court managers, or lawyers. That's a real paradigm shift in some jurisdictions I've been in. Everything that managers do, everything that we do, is but a means to an end, and that end is service to the public. So if we adopted that as our mantra and focused on public service, I think we would see a big change in that level of public trust and confidence. It's still good. I don't want anyone leaving here on a downward note. It's good. As I mentioned right out of the gate, we still have the highest trust levels of any branch of government, and that's a good thing. But there's still quite a gap where we could do better, and my hope is that through the NACM core competencies, including public trust and confidence, that we can learn ourselves more, that we can share this with our staff and our judges back in our home courts, and hopefully we'll get to the point where we can really focus on some of these issues. So that's a quick run through of the first part of public trust and confidence in the courts. We're at our ending point. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have immediate ones, or stay for part two and we'll do a lot more questions as well. So, and I'll be happy to stay here and respond to any questions that you have. But thank you for helping me out with the Kahoot It was my first try at that, so I wanted to see how that would work, and you all played along marvelously. So hopefully this was helpful to you. I think we're time for a break now, and then in another 15 minutes, I'll be starting up with part 2. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.